The Virginia Gazette for January 8, 1767, contains an ad for a Williamsburg cabinet maker claiming spinets and harpsichords made and repaired. A spinet is a small, simple harpsichord, less expensive and therefore more common. Another popular instrument is the violin. An instrument maker in the colonies cannot afford to be a specialist, so he may well get orders for both instruments. The first step in building a spinet is to boil a piece of seasoned walnut for several hours to soften it. Then it can be clamped to a curved form, and when it is dry, it will remain curved. Master craftsman George Wilson undertakes this one winter day, along with his journeyman Mark Hansen. Meanwhile, on a more delicate scale, his other journeyman, Larry Bowers, bends the sides for a new violin. These must be properly curved to fit the form precisely. After the bent side is thoroughly dry, the case can be started. Mr. Wilson uses a template to mark out the shape of the bottom on a blank, made up of spruce planks that have been glued together and planed smooth. This will then be sawn to shape, and the case sides built up around it. Meanwhile, in the other room, work is moving forward on the violin. The sides have all been shaped and glued to the corner blocks. Mr. Bowers takes them off the form to shape down the inside of the blocks. The corner blocks are faired in to the general curve of the sides, but the end blocks will be left fuller, just being rounded off a little on the inside. There are many skills involved in building musical instruments. Mr. Wilson talks about one of these.
Probably the most important aspect of making instruments is the ability which the builder develops in choosing his wood. You have to really learn how to pick wood out above everything else and how to thickness it according to its particular hardness and texture. This is where building becomes really an art. It can't be put down in terms of specific measurements because the wood comes from trees and these all grow to a different degree of hardness and weight depending upon where the tree grew. It all depends on the experience of the builder and his judgment.
Despite a long history of use, hide glue is relatively weak and deteriorates with age. Thus, mechanical joints were developed which hold themselves together in one direction without relying on the glue. The most common of these is the dovetail joint. In this type, the two pieces of wood will be slipped together sideways and, because of the dovetail shape, will not pull straight apart. However, in fine furniture, one seldom wants to see such joints. So, on the spinet, this method is limited to the spine, or back of the instrument. The visible portion will eventually be covered with a molding.
That's it. Let's start another one.
The inside of the case will be veneered with cypress. This has to be cut out of a plank with a special veneer saw. This saw has no set or spread to the teeth, the back being tapered to prevent binding. The wide blade tends to run straight. All of this allows a very precise cut to be taken with a clumsy-looking tool. Mr. Wilson uses a tool called a toothing plane to prepare the bent side for the veneer. This roughs up the surface so the glue will hold better. Then they apply glue to the cypress panels. These have been trimmed down and lined up so that the grain matches, then glued together with paper. As the glue dried, the paper shrank, pulling the joints very tight.
Let's get it as carefully lined up as we can.
These panels are carefully lined up and clamped down tightly. A flexible piece of wood called a gluing caul is used to spread the clamp pressure evenly. More paper is used to keep any excess glue from getting to the caul. Additional strips, called liners, are installed along the edge of the violin sides to provide more gluing surface for the top and back. The back is made first. It is made in two pieces, but these are sawn out of a single piece of maple and book-matched, that is, opened up like a book. This gives a symmetrical pattern to the back. They are glued together to form the blank.
Let me put a pattern underneath this end. Let's put the violin back on the bench in the other shop.
Okay, hold her steady now.
After the inside is veneered, the case can be assembled. In cabinet making, the mechanical joints and hide glue are strong enough to hold the piece together. But a spinet has to withstand string tension, so nails driven through pre-drilled holes are used to back up the glue joint. These also serve to clamp the odd-shaped pieces until the glue can dry. Wood screws, which require considerably more hand labor, are too expensive for this use.
All right.
Because Mr. Wilson is not going to veneer the outside of the case, he doesn't use dovetail joints on the other corners. Simple miter joints will be used. The extensive internal bracing will serve to strengthen them. He glues on temporary blocks to help clamp the corners. These can be chiseled off later. Once the outside of the case is assembled, the interior braces go in quickly. These help hold the miter joints together, but mainly serve to keep the case from collapsing under the tension of the 54 strings. A heavy oak rest plank will take the tuning pins. It is massive enough to withstand the string tension at this end of the instrument. The basic case is finished by adding oak liners to the sides. These support the edges of the soundboard and take the hitch pins. Sloping braces are run from the bent side to the bottom of the case at the spine.
The back of the violin is usually made in two book-match pieces. This gives both a visual symmetry, but more importantly, an acoustic symmetry to the instrument. Most backs are made in this way, and tops have always been made in two pieces. The curl itself is just a waviness in the grain. Curly wood is found in about 1 out of every 100 maple trees. This curl runs at either a right angle to the grain or else at a slight angle to it. The old masters didn't necessarily choose the most intensely curled wood because curl in itself is somewhat detrimental to tone. They would mostly choose medium-figured wood, and then they would have the visual beauty they wanted as well as the tonal quality that they needed. Because the varnish itself is colored, the curl on the back of a fine violin will appear to shift as you move the instrument about. If it were stained, it would freeze them in place.
The keys are cut out of a large blank made of glued basswood boards. Mr. Wilson draws out the whole keyboard using an ivory ruler. This method is much better than trying to make the keys individually. Meanwhile, Mr. Hansen builds the key bed, which is a framework to hold the keys. Drawing straight lines on the wood and looking at them from a low angle allows the craftsman to find any bumps or irregularities in the arch. These are removed with violin planes. After the keys are drawn, there are a number of operations to be carried out before they can be sawn apart. Among these is cutting mortises across the front of the sharps. Mr. Wilson does it this way because it's an awkward place to get a saw. The keys are separated with a thin-bladed saw that has no set to the teeth in order to leave as small a gap between them as possible. Meanwhile, the journeyman can set the balance pins on which the keys pivot. These are set into holes which have been drilled straight through the blank and into the balance rail of the key bed.
Well, the arch is about the right height and have it pretty symmetrical. Ready to start finishing it up around the edges now and getting this groove sculptured in.
Well, would you like to take it over now?
Yes, thank you. A violin is like an organism which has to grow in relation to the materials from which it's made. When you cut the arches, you have to allow for the various hardnesses of wood that you will encounter.